Before I introduce our guest speakers for today, let's just remember that this event takes place in Ndakina, the ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. And we acknowledge and honor with gratitude this land, the waterways, and the people who have stewarded Ndakina throughout the many generations. And of course, in this particular evening, the waterways are going to be a particular topic of conversation. So now, our guest speakers, we are very pleased and honored to have with us three wonderful speakers. Dr. Adam Finkel is a professor of environmental health sciences at the University of Michigan School of Public Health and is also an independent consultant specializing in plaintiffs' exposure to toxicants in the workplace and in the environment. For about 8 years, Dr. Finkel was regional administrator and director of health standards programs at OSHA, the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, where he was responsible for developing regulations to protect workers from chemical, radiological, and biological hazards. After that, he was visiting professor of public and international affairs at Princeton University and professor of environmental and occupational health at Rutgers. And then finally, from 2008 to 2017, he was senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, where he directed the Penn program on regulation, which I think he's going to address some of the results of the research that he did during that time. Dr. Finkel is also co-author of 4 books, including Does Regulation Kill Jobs, which was published in 2014 by University of Pennsylvania Press. And, unbelievably, he's also a professional singer and choral conductor. And these years is spending spring, summer, and fall at his place in Dalton, New Hampshire, right on the shore of beautiful Forest Lake. So for a host of reasons, he's exactly the right person to talk about New Hampshire's problems with water safety. Furthermore, we have with us Tom Irwin, who's vice president for New Hampshire of the Conservation Law Foundation. Tom has led advocacy initiatives in New Hampshire issues such as water quality, childhood lead poisoning, smart growth, transportation, and the proposed Northern Pass electric transmission project. Wide range of concerns of CLF. Now, before CLF, Tom practiced at the Manchester, New Hampshire law firm of Devine, Millet, and Branch, with a focus on civil litigation. And before that was judicial law clerk at the Maine Supreme Court. And Tom has served on the City of Concord's Transportation Committee, the New Hampshire Bar Association's Public Protection Committee, and the boards of New Hampshire Public Health Association and the Five Rivers Conservation Trust. So again, lots of experience in regulation and associated activities. And finally, we have with us, last but definitely not least, Representative Wendy Thomas, who's a member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives, currently representing Hillsborough 12, including Merrimack. Her current term is ending in December 2024, but she's gotten through the Democratic primary on September 10th, and so she's on the ballot for re-election in November. In 2023 to 2024, Wendy served on the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, and in just the last few months, there's been movement and activity on a whole bunch of bills that Wendy has sponsored and co-sponsored, no less than 8 bills relating to regulating PFAS chemicals and establishing frameworks for industry accountability for releasing PFAS into the environment and drinking water supplies. So most or several of these bills were passed, others were not, but lots of activity there as well. She's also sponsored several bills regulating landfill siting in the state. So Wendy has been one of the most persistent and effective public defenders of environmental quality and public health in New Hampshire. And with that, Wendy, I would like to ask if you could start us off from your perspective. of a perch as a legislator serving on the ST&E. Could you start by giving us a quick survey of New Hampshire's water challenges? What's unique about them? Do we share these problems with our neighbors? What does it look like from your point of view?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for having me here today. So what I want to do first is just give you a background of what I'm going to be talking about PFAS and cyanobacteria very quickly, high level overview. And to answer your question immediately, this is a problem that is worldwide. I mean, we're seeing PFAS in polar bear blood. It's every nation has PFAS issues. Every water supply has some PFAS in it, whether or not it's a problem. Well, actually, it always is a problem. But people who say that they don't have PFAS in their water typically haven't tested their water. If they test their water, they're most likely going to have some kind of chemicals in it. But let's talk about PFAS. So PFAS, there's over 14,000 of these chemicals. And so when I refer to PFAS, I'm referring to this class of chemicals. What is unique about them is there's a carbon fluoride bond, and it's one of the strongest bonds we have in nature. It's, some compounds like water, H2O, you apply a little bit of heat and the water, the hydrogen, separates from the oxygen molecule. You need intense heat to separate this carbon fluoride bond, which means that outside of a laboratory, these chemicals don't break down. And that's why they're called forever chemicals. Once they escape the industry or they escape the laboratory, they're there for good. They're just not going to go away. So let's talk about how these chemicals get into the environment. First of all, there's corporations like Saint-Gobain and you can put up the slide if you have it for this. There's corporations like Saint-Gobain in Merrimack that have been sloppy with their waste material. They've dumped water directly into our rivers and our lakes. And they also have incinerated their PFAS waste material, which what it did is it created soot, which then rained down on our town. The water drove it into the ground. You can kind of see this in this graphic that's up here. So the rain drives it into the ground. It gets into our water supply. There's plants that uptake this chemical that's in the water. So now you've got PFAS in our produce. You've got animals that are drinking this water. There's now PFAS in our meat animals. There's PFAS in our eggs. And obviously, if there's PFAS in our bodies, there's going to be PFAS in our urine and PFAS in our feces, which goes to the wastewater department. And now you've got biosolids that have PFAS in them. Typically, we've sold these biosolids to these farms for fertilizer, and that's how it's getting spread into produce. And there was a farm up in Maine where they had to slaughter the entire herd of cows because they had so much PFAS in the cows. So why is this a problem? I mean, PFAS chemicals are all over the place. They're plastic. PFAS in particular it suppresses your immune system. So we get sick more often. Vaccines don't work correctly on people that have PFAS in their blood. It's a hormone disruptor. If you've ever had a teenager in your household, you know how powerful hormones are. If you've got a chemical in there that disrupts them, forget it. It creates learning disabilities in newborns. It raises cholesterol in our bodies, and that has to do also with disrupting the hormones. There's obesity problems. There's cardiac issues. There's tons of cancer. We have a lot of cancer in our town. There's kidney, thyroid, colon. We've got a lot of the reproductive cancers like breast. In women, there's breast, ovarian, fallopian, uterine cancer. In men, there's prostate and testicular cancer. And I just want to give you a very quick overview of what it's like to live in a town that is contaminated with this, with these chemicals. On my street, we have 4 houses. It's an older neighborhood, 4 houses that have private wells that are contaminated with PFAS. In house number 1, the dad has died of kidney cancer. House number 2, the dad and the adult son have died of colon cancer. House number 3, the dad is currently dying of prostate cancer. It's gone into his bones at this point. House number 4, that's my house. In 22, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and my husband had to have a quadruple bypass at age 55. So these are not nuisance chemicals. These are deadly chemicals. And there are ways that you can protect yourselves from these chemicals, but we're going to talk about those later. So the second thing that I quickly want to talk about is something, it's a bacteria that's becoming problematic in New Hampshire. And first I want to tell you how to pronounce it. So it's as in cyanobacteria. It's not cryano, it's not cyno, it's cyanobacteria. And this is actually a really interesting bacteria because it does photosynthesis, which is why you get it's got a color to it. It used to be called blue-green algae, but now they're calling it cyanobacteria. This sort of ties into the whole PFAS thing because why is it a problem? Well, first of all, we've got climate change. So our temperature is getting greater. So our standing bodies of water are getting warmer and warmer. We're getting more rain. And what the rain is doing is it's washing fertilizer into that standing body of water. It's washing pesticides into that body of water. We have lovely cabins around these lakes. We love our lakes. Some of these cabins have failed septic systems. So all of that crud, for lack of a better word, flows into this standing warm body of water, which is perfect. That's the perfect soup for this cyanobacteria. And so what happens is this bacteria, which produces asexually, so it doesn't need, it just kind of buds off, kind of like yeast does. It creates mats on these lakes, and what happens to the mats is they take in the photosynthesis, so they take in the sunlight, they release oxygen, which is good, but they also release toxins, and that's the problem when you get these huge mats on the lakes, because small animals, and I'm talking like dogs, small dogs, if they swim through this, they're going to be essentially poisoned by this toxin. They're going to have neurological disorders. Sometimes they have seizures. They're going to have eye and nose issues. They're going to have skin rashes. That also happens to humans. And so if you swim through one of these, or if you swim near them, you're going to have reactions to this toxin that's now in the water. There's also anecdotal evidence that there may be an association with these specific toxins and neurological diseases, specifically ALS. So this is something that is literally brewing in New Hampshire. It's because of, our climate is changing. It's, unlike PFAS, it's not created in a company or a laboratory, but it's still affecting our water, and we need to pay attention to it. So there's ways you can protect yourself from those bacteria, but we'll talk about those later as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Wendy. That's an awesome introduction. And I think, okay, Adam's already started his slides, which is great. What I would love I'd love to introduce Adam's comments by asking a question, which is that for someone like Adam, who's been studying the regulation and the governance of environmental problems for many years in many different locations, is New Hampshire's setup inhibiting our ability to creatively and effectively regulate things like cyanobacteria or PFAS in our environment? I think for me, that's a critical question. Adam.
And am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yes,
okay,
I can hear you.
Good. I started sharing, and then I didn't know whether I'd unmute. So the slides look okay. They look different on my screen, but okay. So
yeah, you're not in slideshow mode.
yeah, I'm just
That's the
about to
only-
start that again. Okay. So thanks everybody. I'm really very pleased to be asked to do this, especially with Wendy and Tom. And I've been looking at the participant list, and I have friends in the room and some more learned professors than myself and some state reps. So this is a great opportunity. I'm an upbeat guy. My friends in the room will say that, I hope, but this is kind of a downer of a talk, because to segue off what Reinmar just said, I've worked in the federal government for many years. I've advised probably a dozen different states and a couple of cities. And I love this state. I worked here on Mount Washington at Lake of the Clouds in the 1980s, and I've always wanted to move back here. And I feel like I've moved into a time warp. It is much further behind other states and the federal system than I ever imagined or feared. So I have an agenda of things we can do, but I'm starting from the premise that we're behind the curve. So as Reinmar said, I'm a scientist by training, but I did, in addition to working in government, became kind of a scholar of administrative rulemaking and regulation after leaving. So this first slide is from my time 8 years at the law school at Penn in Philadelphia. And we had a large university-wide program looking at how agencies around the world succeed and fail. So these are some of the books that we put out, and I'll talk about this freedom issue throughout. Here's a slide from our final report from one of our bigger projects for the government of Canada, but it was a worldwide look at agencies. And we talked about integrity, empathy, and competence as the sort of triad that agencies need to aspire to. And I have to say, I've been working with and against our DES now for really pretty much daily for 5 years on the landfill issue, both our Forest Lake issue, but the statewide problem of solid waste. And while the staff is terrific in every way, the staff I've worked with on our lake testing, on the permit I needed for my gigantic 8-foot by 12-foot woodshed, which I think went through more redrawings than some larger projects I know. The staff is great, but the upper management and the political appointees are very problematic, as I'll discuss. Here's just another thing from our Penn work, just reminding people that once in a great while, when a regulatory agency does a bad enough job, like the Minerals Management Service after the Gulf oil spill, government will actually step in and shut it down and rebuild it from scratch. And that's getting to be my hope for the future of New Hampshire with respect to DES. And of course, if you're looking for causes of why we're in bad shape, ever since I've been here for 5 years, but for 3 years before that, one of the big causes has been our environmental, in air quotes, engineer, in air quotes, Chris Sununu. And he is an impediment to progress of almost any kind, in my view, but especially on the environmental side. So Wendy talked about cyanobacteria not 3 weeks ago. He was doing his best impersonation of the mayor in Jaws from Amity, saying, we must keep the beaches open. This stuff is not toxic. I mean, no one who ever went to actual environmental engineering school would ever say this kind of stuff. His veto messages on some of our landfill bills have been fact-free in the extreme. He's always ready to make up some horror story about economic activity and economic harm. And they're just talking points for the Business and Industry Association that have no basis in not only in fact, but in economic theory and reality. Here's his veto message on HB 1454 2 years ago, which was a simple science-based bill in response to questions from state senators who wanted a way to cite new landfills in a way that was not what they called arbitrary, but based on the characteristics of the site. And that's what we did. We did it just the way other states and the federal government does it, looking at the porosity of the soil and saying you just don't want to be so close to a water body that the inevitable leaks from these landfills could poison a water body in days or weeks or months. You want to have 5 to 10 years of lead time so you can maybe stop the progress of the plume before it gets there. And once it does, it's irreversible. And so he comes up with some complete BS about how this would have made it impossible to cite a landfill, when in fact DES's own soil map says that about 6 out of 7 random spots on the map, 86% of the state, is underlain by soil that is good, solid clay material, as opposed to the site that Casella is fixated on in Dalton and Bethlehem, which is, in my view, probably one of the single worst small tracts of land that could possibly have been chosen for that task. And we have an agency in DES that is, we talk in our field of scholarship about regulatory capture, when an agency has become a captive of the regulated industry. And I have to say, this is a poster child for that problem. Here's an email that we unearthed through a 91A request that is from the short-lived political appointee, Mark Sanborn at DES, asking Mike Wimsatt, the head of the Waste Division, should we continue to engage in private with the attorney for Casella, Brian Gould? I think we may have some concerns about being directed by an industry lobbyist and lawyer on rulemaking that we're doing. What do you think? And the answer back was, this is the way we do things, and we will continue to meet with him in private. I don't have time, but the slides will be available. You can read this quote these are from my comments on the pending waste management rules, where Mr. Wimsatt goes blithely to the House Environment Committee and just tells some things that I knew were not true, but it took me 24 hours to get his counterpart in Maine to write me back and say, what's he saying about us? It's not true. It's not what we do in the next state next door. Very disconcerting. And we have some influence in the legislative branch. Again, no time to go through this, but this is an op-ed from a couple of weeks ago about a contender for the Senate District 15 down in Concord, who won her primary and will presumably be one of our senators, whose family firm has a really significant connection, not only to Casella, but to some national companies that I've worked with and against for a long time, the American Chemistry Council, the American Council on Science and Health, which is one of the worst purveyors of junk science in the country. So back to freedom for a second. We are in the live free or die state, but I feel that a lot of our population does not have the first clue what freedom is. This is the slide, the stamp is from this postage stamp after FDR died, and anyone who studies history or is old enough to remember his administration, he talked about the 4 freedoms, and 2 of them are freedoms from, and 2 of them are freedoms of. So the freedom to do what you want when you want, no one is the boss of me. That's what a lot of people in the country, but especially up here, think that freedom is. But the other half of freedom is to be free from the abuses and depredations of others. So this other picture I have is from the road that goes from Bethlehem over to Franconia, over the crest of the hill, Mount Agassiz, if anyone knows that road. And on the right-hand side, this picture is a couple of years old now, but to me, it's just very emblematic of what's going on. A guy who put in his city strip for all to see campaign signs for some really serious libertarian candidates from 2022. And then a little bit later, I noticed that next to it, he put this sign. It's obscured on my screen, but I think it says, please don't block my driveway. So it's somebody who got the epiphany and realized that complete libertarianism is not good for him with respect to his driveway, because if people can just park in front of it or block his view, wait a minute, that's not, maybe I do need some of what we in the regulatory field call the wise restraints that make us free. So this is from a talk I gave to the House Environment Committee in June, and I just want to talk for a couple minutes about how far behind we are in 2 very important things that other states do much better than we are. And in short, these are, number 1, the requirement to have serious grown-up discussion with the people you work for, namely the voters, the taxpayers, the companies, the citizens of the state. And then the second is thinking about the wisdom and the pros and cons of a permit or a rule. And believe it or not, we don't do that here. In New Hampshire, everybody is just going around in circles saying, is this permit or this regulation legal? And pretty much everywhere else, certainly since 1981, when Ronald Reagan put in effect an executive order that has been remained in force and improved by Presidents Clinton and Bush Sr. and Obama and Biden since then, to say that when you're going to do something that affects the whole country, and in our case, in the federal system, and has tremendous potential for saving lives and for costing people money, you need to think about the balance between the money expended and the lives saved or the environment preserved, and make some kind of a reasonable showing that people can sink their teeth into about whether you're doing more good than harm. And we don't do that here. What we have here are people who say, and this is a direct quote from the chair of the Wetlands Council, we don't protect the environment, we protect the statute, which is an important goal, but somebody has to be out there protecting the environment, protecting public health, protecting children, protecting education, whatever it is. And they don't do that. They just look at the statute. Why? Because I said so. Why did you say so? Because I said so, that's why. So I'm a pioneer in developing and improving methods of cost-benefit assessment. It's been around for many, many years. I think I have some slides about this, and it's not rocket science. It can be done quickly and easily. It can be done expensively and better. But if you don't think about it at all, and all you do is look to the statute, well, here's an example. The statute that DES cites as its authority to make these new landfill rules that I hope to talk about for a minute, literally it only says, if I can paraphrase, DES is allowed to do stuff. And then there are 14 more of these areas of stuff that they can do. But it doesn't even say, as the federal laws have said for 50 plus years, anything like, in order to protect the environment with an ample margin of safety with consideration of cost. Anything that would tell anybody, are they doing it wisely or not? It's just, you have authority. And then you go to the legislature when the rule comes out and ask them, tell them it's unscientific, it's improper, it was done in secret, it's unprotected, it's out of the mainstream. And their answer is, but it follows the statute. And the statute says nothing can be improper. So we got a problem here. Again, the slides will be available. This is the Administrative Procedure Act that talks about how agencies are supposed to interact with the public. It's 78 years old at this point. It's been around, but it's not. We have one called the APA of New Hampshire, but it doesn't say what it's supposed to say. It doesn't allow citizens or companies to go to court and say it may be legal, but it's arbitrary or capricious, which is code word with a lot of case law behind it for they screwed up, they didn't listen to the science, they made a mistake, they met in secret, they did all kinds of improper things that we're not allowed in this state to challenge them on. All we can say is, did they break the law? And again, with vapid laws, they can't break the law. 1981 executive order, cost, benefit, and risk assessment is routine. There are journals that come out every month with tables of contents like this, which you can look at another time. I'm not checking my watch, Reinmar, but in 1 minute, I just want to say,
no problem.
When the agency puts out a rule in most states and in the federal system, they also have to put out a document that says, we had a public hearing, we took testimony, we got written comments, we read them, we heard them, we listened, and we were challenged on these issues, and here is our response. And hopefully, if the experts and the public know what they're talking about, some of these responses should be, hey, you were right, we're going to change it. But when they don't change it, it needs to be something other than because we said so, this is why. It needs to be something like, we heard you and we disagree for these reasons. It's a policy choice, and we think that the wisdom is on our side. It's an empirical choice, and you presented this article in the peer-reviewed literature, but we presented 5 other ones that are the opposite. Whatever you can do. So this is just to suggest, when one of the rules I did at OSHA was the Federal Standard on Respiratory Protection. The box at the bottom is one sentence from the rule, and the next slide is how we explained why that sentence stayed the same way from the proposal to the final. We heard testimony from both sides. We reference each of the testimony that we heard, so you can go back and read it if you want in the electronic docket. And we decided for these reasons that this was not a good change, and we're going to go with what we proposed. DES, on the other hand, I think this is a pretty typical one. People said, you got it wrong, and their answer is one sentence, well, no, we think we got it right. Another problem with rulemaking is when you try to suggest things that aren't there that should be there. My experience so far, and I certainly expect to see this in a month or so when the landfill rules come back out to the public in final form, DES is going to say, yeah, we heard you. So what? Not a good idea. Why? They're not going to tell you. I think it's a good idea to, given the history of mismanagement, incompetence at landfills in this state and in neighboring states. A lot of things happen in our state on nights and weekends when the landfills are not guarded or watched. I think the landfill rules should say, for your $1 billion revenue stream, you should hire a night watchman and a weekend watchman. And I've put that in writing, and I bet you they're going to say, not a good idea. We're not going to tell you why. Now, one data point now, before I conclude. These landfill rules, which are going to come out in a month or so, they were proposed in October, revised several times, gotten weaker each damn time. The key sentence in my view is basically, where can you put a new landfill in New Hampshire? And most other states and provinces of Canada and foreign countries all say that some soil is too sandy and gravelly and porous to put a landfill in. So this is a slide to give you some sense of just how outrageous this is. So the x-axis is in feet per year. How quickly can the pollution move through the soil in a year? And states like Illinois, Texas, Arkansas, a country like India that we do not think of as a environmentally, first-class regulatory country. Nevertheless, they want it to be basically an inch per year. And then there's some states and provinces that are a foot per year. States and the country of Nigeria, 10 feet per year. If you imagine me clicking through 55 more slides of blank material and getting to the 56th slide on this scale, we would get to 15 feet per day, which is what DES is content with and is going to promulgate in the next month. It happens to be a number that is necessary so that the only active landfill application in the state in our lifetime from Casella Waste Systems of Rutland, Vermont, in an active sand and gravel pit next to this beautiful forest lake that's on my slide background, that number is needed to let that permit go through. It's not a coincidence. It's a backroom deal to reverse engineer and rule for the whole state to benefit one guy in Rutland, Vermont. I'm angry. I've been at this with John Swanders on this call and others for 5 years, trying to say, you can't do this. It's not, we think it's illegal and we'll go to court and hopefully prevail, but it's certainly egregious. That's it. I just wanted to say, if you ever get to the Old Man of the Mountains Plaza, exit 34C off of 93, there are many messages and memories on that plaza in the paving stones, and now we have one. I wanted to say Save Forest Lake. The nice people at the plaza said that's a little too specific and political, so it says defend water. And I think I just made one more slide this afternoon. This is our lake. It's pristine. We've tested it for PFAS and every priority pollutant and every heavy metal and E. coli. It's clean as clean can be. But somebody, one guy and one landowner want to put 18 million tons of trash, which will turn into 1 billion gallons of leachate, which will go down the highway to Concord and Allentown and Franklin and Manchester, diluted but not treated, into the Merrimack, down to Massachusetts. It's 50% imported, which we don't need to do. And, I'm a scientist, but I live 10 feet from this lake. I'm looking at it right now in the sunset. And, to me, it's not because it's in my backyard. It's because the creator put it there. And we shouldn't just throw it away for no good reason. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adam Finkel. Very, very interesting set of ideas there. And I'd like to turn now to Tom Irwin, and then maybe back to Wendy after that, because what I'd like to do is to kind of cycle through our guest speakers for reactions to what you've heard. And I know that CLF, of which Tom is the director for New Hampshire, is not planning advocacy on this particular set of issues in the near future, but they have in the past, and it does CLF does take a particular set of has a particular set of approaches to these kinds of problems. So I'd love to hear what Tom has to say about the regulatory environment in New Hampshire from CLF's perspective.
Thank you, Reinmar, and thank you for having me here tonight. Yeah, I guess I'll qualify that introductory statement by saying we are very much involved in water advocacy. We always have some advocacy or lawsuit in play at any given time to protect water quality standard. I think what we aren't planning is a major legislative initiative in the state legislature in the coming session. But we are very much engaged in advocacy to protect our water resources. And I thought it would be helpful to briefly discuss the Clean Water Act, because I knew through Adam there'd be a lot of discussion about regulation at the state level, challenges with the Department of Environmental Services, with our laws. But the Clean Water Act plays a very important role, and especially in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire is one of just 3 or 4 states across the country where the Environmental Protection Agency is the permitting authority. So the overarching premise under the Clean Water Act is that it prohibits the discharge of pollutants to waters of the United States, and in our case in New Hampshire, that's pretty much all our surface waters, without a permit. So no one can discharge pollutants to surface waters without a permit under the Clean Water Act. It's called a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES permit. That requirement opens up some really important areas for advocacy. One area of advocacy is permit advocacy. So if there is a new facility that's being built that's going to discharge pollutants, that facility has to get a permit. And again, in this case, from the Environmental Protection Agency. And that provides the opportunity for public hearing and public comment and public engagement, and if necessary, an appeal of a permit if a permit is issued on on the basis of something that a member of the public considers illegal. Those appeals do not move through the state permitting appeals process. They move through the federal process. They go to the Federal Environmental Appeals Board, and from there into the federal court system. A really important requirement in that permitting process is that EPA cannot lawfully issue a permit for a discharge that will cause or contribute to the violation of state water quality standards. So there's a really important intersection between federal law and what our state regulators, DES, does in terms of establishing water quality standards. By the way, when DES establishes a water quality standard, it has to be approved by EPA. So there is a back and forth there between the state and the feds. But in any event, that is a really important requirement. And we use that requirement, for example, in the Great Bay context, where we built the case using science that had been developed by UNH professors that was not making its way into the regulatory process. We built the case that nitrogen was essentially killing the Great Bay estuary. It was degrading the cornerstone habitat, eelgrass. And through that advocacy, we were successful in getting the EPA to list waters throughout the Great Bay estuary as impaired as a result of nitrogen. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Endangered Species Act. It's sort of similar to that, where under the Endangered Species Act, you get regulatory protections for a threatened or endangered species, and that species gets extra extra protection. In this case, we got, through the EPA, more substantial protections for the Great Bay Estuary and the many waters that are part of the estuary that really changed the regulatory landscape and finally forced EPA to regulate for nitrogen. Before this, there was not a single wastewater treatment plant or any other facility that had a nitrogen limit in its permit. So as a result of having waters listed as impaired, as violating water quality standards, we were able to up the game from a regulatory standpoint, and that is what has resulted in wastewater treatment plants throughout the watershed, the Great Bay Estuary watershed, upgrading to dramatically reduce the amount of nitrogen they're pumping into the water. So permit advocacy is, I think, a really important tool to ensure that our waters are benefiting from the full power of the Clean Water Act. And, that's a role that we all can play, from the individual level to, watershed associations to organizations like CLF. And that engagement can definitely make a difference. I mentioned the example of the Great Bay Estuary. Getting to the issue of cyanobacteria, the issue that Representative Thomas mentioned, we engaged in permit advocacy with the EPA related to the state's largest fish hatchery, the Powder Mill Fish Hatchery in the Merrimack River, which flows into Alton Bay. That facility was hammering the Merrimack River with phosphorus, which was leading to cyanobacteria blooms, closing down that river for recreational use. And, through permit advocacy, we were successful in getting the EPA, because every 5 years, they are supposed to require a new permit and go through this process again. So in the last permit round, we were successful in getting much more stringent levels for phosphorus discharges. So that's sort of the permit advocacy bucket. The other bucket of advocacy that the Clean Water Act enables is enforcement. The Clean Water Act, like several other federal environmental laws, like the Clean Air Act, has what's called a citizen suit provision. It's a provision in the statute that specifically authorizes affected individuals and organizations to enforce the Clean Water Act, to bring lawsuits against dischargers who are violating the act. And dischargers can violate the act in one of two ways. The most basic way is discharging pollutants into waters of the United States without a permit. And an example of a case we brought under that theory, we sued the Pease Development Authority for discharging stormwater pollution into the Great Bay Estuary without a permit. Without a permit that we believed they were required to obtain under the Clean Water Act. So we brought a lawsuit. The end result of that lawsuit was a settlement that committed the Pease Development Authority to getting a permit and managing its stormwater. So that's the most basic case. If you've got a polluter out there who's discharging without a permit, that's a pretty basic case. And any of these citizen suits are brought in federal court. The other types of cases are basically cases where the discharger does have a permit, but they're violating the terms of the permit. And permits contain specific numeric limits that can be violated, but they also contain that requirement that discharges not violate state water quality standards, which gets you into it gets you into not just numeric standards, but also what are called narrative water quality standards, which are designed to provide additional protections to our water bodies. You know, we've brought many cases under the Clean Water Act against polluters who are violating some term of their permit. And in fact, in addition to the permit advocacy related to the powder mill fish hatchery, we brought a lawsuit against the Fish and Game Department because their discharges were violating the permit they had. That led to a settlement with a number of commitments by Fish and Game to address those discharges. So yeah, I just wanted to provide that overlay and you know, to again circle back to the issue of PFAS, which Representative Thomas mentioned. You know, we're involved right now in some advocacy that is in the permit advocacy bucket. We will see if we end up in the enforcement bucket, but you know, the city of Manchester's wastewater treatment plant is discharging PFAS at pretty high levels into the Merrimack River. And that facility, it's the only one in the state that does it, incinerates its sewage sludge. So they're not only putting PFAS into the river, which is a drinking water source for downriver communities, they're also emitting PFAS into the air. And we are pushing EPA hard in the current permitting process to require the city to take some steps, which they can do. And what we are advocating is that they go upstream. The city of, you know, just like any other wastewater treatment operator, the city has the ability to regulate industrial users that are sending industrial discharges into the wastewater treatment plant. And that's the source of a lot of this PFAS. And Adam mentioned earlier the issue of leachate from Bethlehem. Casella, the Bethlehem landfill, was shipping truckloads of PFAS-laden leachate to Manchester. And again, you know, with those PFAS being discharged, you know, none of these wastewater treatment plants can treat PFAS. So, you know, in that case, leachate being trucked down, discharged into the wastewater treatment plant, again, with those PFAS being discharged into the river and emitted into the air through incineration. So there is, I just wanted to put out there the federal overlay, because I think the Clean Water Act is clearly a powerful tool. It's not perfect, and it's far from perfect if the regulators charged with implementing it are not watched closely. We've seen in the past where EPA has just sort of been asleep at the switch. But it is a powerful tool, and I think one reason I like it is ultimately, if you have to go to court, you go to federal court, which, if I had to take my choice, I'd rather be there than state court.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that perspective, Tom. And I kind of want to circle back now to Representative Wendy Thomas, because Wendy, you started out partly in response to a question of mine, pointing out that from the biophysical perspective, that is to say, as far as the actual you know, chemical content of the environment, these are problems that we see everywhere. But there is a unique aspect, it seems like, from what Adam has said and from what Tom said, that that New Hampshire might be somewhat unique in the regulatory environment that's kind of superimposed on that biophysical reality. So from the perspective of a legislator, what is it that we can do? And I kind of want to go through each of the speakers again, if that's okay, and sort of address the question, what can we do, and particularly what can our audience, the public, do about moving some of these issues forward in our state? Representative Thomas.
Sure, thank you. So in the chat there were some questions, what can we do? So I just want to get how you can protect yourself personally, and then I'll talk about the bills. But for cyanobacteria, if you're swimming in a body of water that has cyanobacteria, shower after you swim with soap. Consider using goggles and nose clips. This comes into the whole regulatory discussion. Stop using fertilizers and pesticides around standing water. Fix faulty septic systems. And we always have bills on these. So we're trying really hard at the State House. A big one is enforcement of regulations. We just don't have that in New Hampshire. But there needs to be more testing. There needs to be more warnings. To pick up what Adam said, about Jaws, if there's a sign that says there's a shark in the water, don't swim in the bloody water. If there's a sign that says there's a bacterial bloom, take it seriously. And there's also climate change mitigations, like we may be looking at aeration of standing water. That might be something that we need to do. As far as the PFAS, the way that you get most contaminated is through drinking water. So use GAC, which is granulated activated carbon filters, and RO, which is reverse osmosis. I will never drink water that's not filtered again, never, because you can't trust it. You can't smell PFAS, you can't see it, you can't taste it. Avoid produce, meat, and dairy that comes from areas that are PFAS infected, like southern New Hampshire. We're an outdoor state. We use, we go hiking. We use Gore-Tex clothing. We use Gore-Tex tents. That's fine when you're outside, but when you're home, put them in the garage or, get them away from your living area. And don't wear your Gore-Tex jacket to the grocery store. Put it away. Start paying attention. If anything is waterproof, it's because it's using PFAS chemicals. So there's a lot of PFAS that's used in, believe it or not, menstrual products. There's a lot of PFAS that's used in makeup. PFAS is used in dental floss, like the Glide dental floss that works really well. It works well because it's slippery because of the PFAS. Get your blood tested. When I got cancer, I had my blood tested, and I'm one of the water warriors in Merrimack. I've been doing this since 2016. We put in a whole house filtration system. We put in RO. I thought, sure, there was going to be a little PFAS in my blood, but I didn't think it was going to be much. I have 12 PFAS chemicals in my blood that are over the toxic limit that's allowed for humans. So much is in my blood that I had to have additional cancer surgery to remove my ovaries and my fallopian tubes because they thought it was just a matter of time. So get your blood tested. It just allows you to know what tests to have to be monitored for this. There's the Environmental Working Group, EWG.org. They always have lists of products that are high in PFAS. The other thing is, please, 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 this is what this audience can do. Vote in people who are proactive about protecting the environment. We've had bills this year that have limited PFAS products containing PFAS in New Hampshire. Once it's in the environment, it's almost impossible to get it out. So let's stop the tap. Let's turn off the tap. Let's stop putting these products in our landfill. Let's stop using them in New Hampshire. We had a bill to hold PFAS industries responsible and accountable for what they're doing to us, like Saint-Gobain. That's one of the bills that Sununu vetoed. A bill that I got actually passed and Sununu signed it came about because I heard about a family in Litchfield, which is right across the river from us. They bought a house. I mean, beautiful house for their family. It had a private well. No one told them that the well was so contaminated they shouldn't use it. They only found out after the fact when they bought the house. They came home and there was a water delivery from Saint-Gobain. We're on that too. We've had bottled water for 5 years. So, I mean, no one ever told them that their well water could make them sick. So now the real estate agents have to at least, I wanted them to have testing, but at least they're going to mention it. So now it's required that they mention there could be PFAS in the water. We've got some other bills that are coming up. Where we've got some bills that have been filed early. I'm going to be, I filed a bill that would ban ski, boat, and board wax in New Hampshire that contains PFAS, because that goes directly into our water system. So that will be added to the products bill that was, hopefully, that was just passed this year. A lot of it, we're waiting for the results of the election, you know, because depending on whom is in charge is going to depend. That's going to give us a good indication of what we can get going. But you know, there's a couple of us up at the State House. We have been working on this. We're called Water Warriors. We've been fighting this for so long, and we're going to continue the fight because this is killing our friends, our neighbors, and our families. And we just have to address it. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wendy Thomas. And I'd like to turn to Adam. Dr. Finkel, given your extensive experience, not just in New Hampshire, but in plenty of other states that have their own regulatory issues, I'm sure, how do you think these set of problems that you outlined can be addressed, and what can people do in the public to help that process along? What do you think?
So I mean, I have definitely want to get to a list of bills by number, both from last year and that are going to be refiled with different numbers. And you'll stop me when I've taken too long. But good question. I think it's been covered. I think it's a matter of staying in touch with through networks like these of what the issues are. It's voting for the right people. We have a great opportunity in November to do that. I do want to say I'm a lifelong Democrat. There are a couple of Republicans that I'm going to support with contributions. So, you know, not in my area, but we have a couple of really helpful Republicans in the House and in the Senate. And frankly, part of the problem is that even with the Senate's been the problem, right? The Senate is the one that voted 16-8 for our time of travel groundwater bill, but then did not override the governor's veto because he twisted some arms and got it down to 12-12. But even with a 13-11 Democrat majority, hypothetically, next January, you know, I have no allegiances to anybody, so I can just come right out and say it. We have a couple of Democratic senators downstate in the Concord, Manchester area who are not really friendly to us. They sometimes grudgingly and with a bitter look on their face vote the right way, but in my view, they're not reliable. So we need 2 or 3 Republican votes in the next session to get us over the top. In terms of specific bills, we do have one coming up on October 10th, HB 1622. I put a little bit of the veto message on my slides. A very simple bill sponsored by 4 Republican senators, and then we grafted on a House bill. But it passed unanimously in both chambers. It simply would require agencies to put public comments that they receive electronically up online so that other people can see them. And it would require these response documents that I talked about to at least have some words in the law, like a reasoned response with data and evidence to support the agency's position. And it also, the third piece of it, which was the Republican senator's part, on behalf of industry, said that if a company gets fined by an agency in New Hampshire illegally, like for a rule that had already expired, they have to return the money and they have to give you a chance to go to court and get your fees back. And the governor vetoed it and said, we can't afford to fix our mistakes, and we can't afford to put comments online. It's as if web space costs money. I mean, it's the craziest thing. So let's override that bill and stick a thumb in his eye on his way out the door. We had a bill that Rebecca McWilliams, who I think is on the call, was the champion of, 1614, that would have begun to change the standard for judicial review in New Hampshire. It would have said arbitrary or capricious, just like 36 other states. And it didn't get a great hearing in judiciary. The chair is the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in the state. And, you know, I see no problem here was, I think, one of his quotes. Well, if you close your eyes, you don't see a problem. And then in the landfill area, again, I want to go back to the rules for a second. Please support us, those of us on this call and others who will be going to the JLCAR, the Joint Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, in probably November or December, to say that, yeah, once in a blue moon, you send one of these rules back and say it's not legal, it's not proper, it's violates common sense, and we need people to help us make that case with these landfill rules, with just this completely out of step criterion for citing new landfills. And then next year there will be a bill, I'm sure, on a moratorium, 5 years maybe, for no new landfills, because we know, based on DES data, we don't need one in this state at least for 10 or 12 more years. And we all know that the giant landfill in Rochester, run by in my view, obviously a bigger and better track record company than Casella, will ask for an extension. They do have capacity. They will probably get one through the 2050s. And they have enough room all by themselves to handle all the waste that we generate in New Hampshire without even meeting our 25% reduction goal. So a 5-year moratorium to just not create a new problem that we don't need with 1 billion gallons of imported leachate would be a good first step. And we almost passed it last year, but again, the Senate got in our way. And then finally, there will be a bill, I'm sure, to fix some of the other problems with landfills. Tom Irwin knows very well that there was a state Supreme Court decision that CLF was the plaintiff on that didn't really solve the problem, that we have a statute that talks about the public benefit of landfills, but first of all, doesn't say that it's any kind of net benefit. It just basically describes benefit as providing capacity, but doesn't talk anything about the harms or the disbenefits. But it also doesn't talk at all about the timing of the benefit. And DES always, in my view, at least since I've been back here, always siding with industry, says basically if there's a brief period of time, weeks, months, a year, in the next 2 or 3 decades, when we might need a landfill, we'll just let it run for 20 or 30 years on the theory that our laws allow us to basically oversubscribe in case there might be a very short-term problem. We need a very simple bill that just says, no, you can't do that. You can give a permit if you really want to, but you can't start accepting waste until there's a year when there's actually a need for it. And that would do a lot to fix the problem that we have up north of Casella wanting to get a foot in the door, dangling, by the way, an extortion project, in my view. Please don't, well, this is recorded, so I said the word extortion, but they're basically saying that if you let us build this ruinous landfill in the north, we maybe will build a nice, shiny recycling center in the south near Manchester. That's obviously a profit center. They could have built it last year or yesterday. And any legislator who thinks that they should be combining those two projects as if they have anything to do with each other, other than the same company will get revenue from both, is being hoodwinked. But there's a lot of that going around. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, Rob, did you have a
yeah, just
question,
quickly,
comment?
Tom, you wanted to address, unfortunately, I think Deborah perhaps left the talk, but I think it's really still important to talk about our question relative to what the Clean Water Act can and can't do.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Before I do, I echo everything Representative Thomas and Adam just said about the importance of engaging with our elected officials. I would add to that that in terms of the legislative process, we ought to all be demanding more of DES. And by that, I mean, you know, I have had the experience more than once of being in meetings with DES staff, and they love to point across the river, and they will say, the folks across the river aren't letting us do this or are forcing us to do that. And they, you know, so I've seen DES invoke the legislature as a defense for why they can't do something. But when they cross the river and you know, go to committee hearings, they will often show up saying, we neither oppose nor support this bill. And then they will go on to say, you know, all the bad things, you know, if it's something, let's just say, they seem to be wedded to preserving the status quo too often. So I'll stop there. But with respect to the Clean Water Act and as it relates to landfills, well, I'll start specifically with the Granite State landfill. Because it will have a massive footprint, as Adam said, it will have a massive impact on wetlands. It's actually, I'm not aware of a private development project that has ever had a more significant impact in terms of actual acres of wetlands destroyed than the Granite State landfill. Significantly more direct impact than, say, Northern Pass. So as a result of its very significant impact on wetlands, unlike most projects, they will have to get what's called an individual permit from the Army Corps of Engineers under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. So Clean Water Act, in addition to regulating discharges of pollutants into waters, also regulates wetlands. And under these circumstances, the Army Corps is asserting its authority. It provides a very important advocacy opportunity. As to the question of whether the Clean Water Act could require a landfill that's discharging leachate into surface waters to get a permit, the answer is possibly. A few years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision in a case brought by the county of Honolulu. And in that case, the court determined that under some circumstances, pollutants that are discharged through groundwater into a surface water can, in fact, trigger the permitting requirements of the Clean Water Act. Before that case, the conventional wisdom was you had to have a pipe or a ditch or some kind of very specific conveyance in order for the Clean Water Act permitting program to come into play. But as a result of that decision, under certain facts, if groundwater is conveying pollutants in a certain way into waters of the United States, then yes, that permitting requirement can be triggered. So I guess taking that down to the level of, say, Granite State landfill, yeah, there would need to be some ongoing failure or some failure of the leachate collection system leading to the discharge of pollutants through the groundwater into Forest Lake. If that happened, then that Clean Water Act theory could be asserted.
Way too late, of course, but that, I mean, you're right. Reinmar, can I just say one quick thing that I forgot to mention, and now I did make myself a note. I'll come back, sorry.
Well, I was actually wondering that there's one issue that hasn't been mentioned explicitly, which is that I think, Adam, you said that the Rochester landfill could take care of waste generated in the state for the next, 30 years or something. What about the waste that's not generated in the state? And there's a considerable flow of that. And how does that figure into the the outlook for the future? Adam, I suppose
a great softball question. No,
I
I'd love to talk about that quickly, and I've remembered what I was going to say also. I'll address that one first. So it's very complicated interpretation of the Interstate Commerce Clause, but basically there is one surefire way if the state wanted to stop the flow of Massachusetts and Connecticut and other waste into our state legally. We would do what other states have done, which is to say that the next landfill in New Hampshire shall be private on publicly owned land operated by a private company for profit. That circumvents the Interstate Commerce Clause. It allows the state to say, we want out-of-state waste at a certain flow. We want more, less, or none at all. That's completely up to the state if it's on state-owned land. So we had a bill to do that, and it passed the House, but again, went to the Senate and died with no grown-up discussion whatsoever. And with DES, Tom is absolutely right, but as usual, compared to me, too kind. They say they take no position despite their hypocrisy, and then they come in for 15 minutes and give a litany of complaints about the bill. You know, with no position, but by the way, it's a terrible bill for these 15 reasons, 14 and a half of which are made up alternative facts anyway. So yeah, we need a publicly owned landfill. There are, I'm sure, plenty of tracts, maybe tracts that the state already owns that could be suitable for that. And DES's position is, we don't take a position, but you need thousands of acres for a landfill. And we've looked and there aren't any 1,000-acre tracts. And of course, that's another alternative fact that isn't true. Real quick, I do think, despite my criticism of DES management, as I said, they have great staff and they're underfunded and under-resourced. So one thing people could advocate for is, for example, we could double the number of inspectors who inspect landfills and transfer stations and recycling centers if we had one more person, because we have one right now. We have one person doing all the cyanobacteria work in the state, a terrific staff person, but it's one person. Now, where's the revenue going to come from? I'll volunteer to start paying the interest and dividends tax again if we had a governor who would do that. I think the current use tax rates are way too low, but that's another issue. And then 10 seconds, Bill, I forgot to mention, which comes back into the freedom issue, HB 1562 that Rosemary Rung sponsored. It was simply to change the definition of what a jet ski, personal watercraft, is, so that people who live on lakes could once again, after a 30-year hiatus, work with the state and with their jet ski owners on individual lakes and work out times of use, or don't use them in shallow waters, or ban them, whatever the majority of people on the lake wanted to do. We can't have that discussion because the manufacturers have gotten around the definition in New Hampshire of what is a jet ski. So Rosemary wrote this simple bill that would only have changed the definition, and back to Live Free or Die, we had 200 or more people lined up in Reps Hall to say, basically, you will take my jet ski out of my cold, dead hand. And Rosemary had to pull the bill away and basically apologize for ever having thought about it. But they cause algal blooms because jet skis have impellers, not propellers, and they suck up sediment from the bottom and they suspend it in the water with phosphorus in it. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And I think we're coming toward the end of our an hour and a half. Obviously, we could talk about this for 5 or 6 more hours, but I think I want to turn now to any questions that are in the chat. And Cynthia Walter was just raising her hand and would like to say something. Go ahead, Cynthia, and make sure you're unmuted first.
Okay, sorry about hard to find that little dot. So this has been terrific, but just to conclude then, a few points of, we see a lot of emphasis at the state and federal levels where there's a lot of knowledge on the part of Wendy and the other speakers. But Adam and Tom, we see that there's a lot of work in those areas, but realize that many of us are in towns and we know our legislators, not our legislators, we know our elected officials only as our city councilors, town selectmen, and also our conservation commission, our planning board members, and so forth. Can any of the speakers say something to the effect about the effects of those decision makers and how they, either alone in small cases or in consort, if they were to see how some legislative bills or some initiatives on the part of DES and so forth could benefit those towns, those municipalities. Let me give you a quick example. Dover had to spend $50 million to upgrade our wastewater treatment plant, in part because of the PFAS and the other elements that were in there. That is something all of us taxpayers are now bearing the burden. Other towns have yet to do those upgrades. That is going to cost those municipalities a huge amount. So there's motivation for us to clean up and get DES to help us clean up and get the Clean Water Act, the federal agencies, to help us clean up things so that we don't have to pay huge amounts in our local taxes. How can we bring our local people into this mix? Thank you.
Well, that sounds like a perfect question for Representative Thomas.
Yeah, and I just unmuted myself too, because I was like,
Mhm.
you're right in my wheelhouse. So in our town, we have a town council, even though we have 30,000 people, we really should be a city. But when we started talking about PFAS, we were called, of course, hysterical women. We were called fearmongers. The town council did as much as they could to sort of block us. We were literally told to shut up, that there was nothing we could do about the water. But we remained persistent, and that's the lesson from Erin Brockovich. You know, you've got to just keep getting in their face, and you've got to keep holding them accountable. Well, now, I mean, 2024, since 2016, we finally have scientific proof. So we're using that. We're working with the town. It's always going to be difficult because there's never enough money. In our town, we passed a warrant article, and we paid $14 million of our taxpayer money to filter our water because Saint-Gobain wasn't doing it. So, it's linking arms. I go around New Hampshire and I talk to groups about PFAS. I work with other legislators. I went to a PFAS conference, and because of that, legislators from around New England were all meeting and talking about PFAS so we can be on the same page. It takes, and remember, in New Hampshire, we get paid $100 a year to do all of this work.
Yeah.
It takes just a tremendous amount of work, and it takes, sticking with it and just constantly banging the drum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Representative. I think I've got a question from Angus Barlow, and then Susan is gonna have a few words to wrap up. Angus, are you there?
Hi.
What's your question,
Okay,
Angus?
so my question is, has there been any research or any sort of interrogation into what the status of PFAS? I know this was mentioned that the PFAS is in the grocery store, in the meat, dairy, and some of the produce. Has there been any interrogation or investigation as to the PFAS contamination in terms of the agricultural system in New Hampshire? Because there's a lot of ways that I know PFAS can get into the animal feed. It can get into animal water supply. And when you have animals that are being fed this stuff for 2 years, 3 years, they get slaughtered. It's like eating a PFAS bomb. So the PFAS status in terms of the agricultural and the food products that are distributed throughout the state is something very concerning. And I was wondering if there's been any substantial research or interrogation on this subject.
I have the answer to that one too. I don't want to keep grabbing all of these though.
Go for it.
I have been begging DES to test our produce, our meat, our dairy, and our eggs since 2016. Well, actually, since 2019, when I went to a conference, and over in Italy, there's a town that is also contaminated with PFAS, and they have actually tested their food, and so they know that their food is contaminated. We have not done that in New Hampshire, even though we're begging them to do it. Sort of along those lines, what we're seeing, especially in southern New Hampshire, especially in Merrimack, is that our small domestic animals, our cats and our dogs, are dying of cancer just all over the place. I've had to put 4 little dogs down because of cancer. You talk to anyone in town, and their cats and their dogs are dying because these are the canaries in the coal mine, right? They're the small body weight, and so they're the ones that are the most effective. affected by these chemicals. So, you know, you bring up an excellent point, and yes, we need the testing, but DES always comes back and says they don't have the money, they don't have the resources.
Something to think about. Susan has a question, I guess, and then Representative Tom Plisage.
Yes, hi. Okay, I'm not muted. So first of all, to represent someone who could not be here tonight, but was speaking to me, who is a journalist, towns are quiet about this because they don't want it to spoil their real estate costs. You know, what Wendy said she got hit with is still happening everywhere. So just because you're not hearing about it in your town doesn't mean all is well. So Wendy, you can suggest what is the next step if anyone suspects it. And then similar question for Wendy, maybe not now, but could you let us know what are the ways that we can know how our reps voted on these important environmental issues? I think that was a question from Val Roman of Wyndham. I was able to find only 4 issues where we saw how people voted, but maybe there's more elsewhere that you can point us to.
That list can be compiled. It would take a little bit of work, but I'll do my best to try to get it together. As far as the towns and you're right. I mean, real estate agents don't mention that there's PFAS in the water because they want to sell the houses. You know, we have to be very careful when we talk about PFAS in our produce because we're an agricultural state. And even Merrimack is an agricultural town. So we don't want to put our farmers out of business. You know, we don't want to put our orchard growers out of business. So we have to walk this very fine line, you know, because if we get testing of apples in Merrimack and they show that they're PFAS, you know, that farmer's going to be out of work, out of a business. So it's this constant sort of dance of you know, protecting people and testing and getting the word out. One of the things that we do in Merrimack, there's a group with Lorene Allen, it's Citizens for Clean Water. We're focusing on education. You know, we're trying so hard to just educate people. And just as a quick, I saw it in the chat. Somebody said we also have to educate our doctors because they don't know about PFAS. After I had my mastectomy and I had my blood work done and it showed I had so much PFAS in my blood, I gave the results to my surgeon and said, look at this. What are we going to do about this? And without even looking at the results, she pushed the paper back to me and she said, I'm just a surgeon. I don't need to know about PFAS. And I said, well, you're no longer my surgeon. And, you know, and I fired her. You know, if you're not going to take it seriously, I mean, a lot of people need surgery now because we have PFAS cancers. You know, it was just ridiculous. But we're working on a few projects that are bringing education. So it's a complex topic, Susan, and I don't have all of the answers, but it's education, persistence, and laws that will make people respond. Thank you.
It's one of those issues that where people have to get out of their zones of comfort to some extent. I mean, I think that the example that you've given is perfect, but it's a cross-cutting issue, and this is one of the complexities about it. Let's see. Somebody else had a question.
Representative Plisage?
Comment.
Yes.
Yeah.
My hand just went down. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yes. Representative Plisage. Maybe to Wendy. Let me speak to Wendy so everyone can hear. All these bills, everything what we're talking about, going to be tied to a bill which needs a committee hearing. Now, the 20 some odd legislators that's hearing all of this is hearing a lot of propaganda because all our departments are under the executive. And whoever is an executive seems to want to protect that. Now, Wendy, Leah Cushman tried to ask people when they give testimony under oath. I really think both of our parties put a squash on that. And we're not, to get the other 18 legislators to understand what's going on, we need honest testimony. So when you ask the DES a pointed question, yes or no, and they can't answer it, they need to come back with an answer. That's their job. But right now they just give us a so-so and we're left on our own. This is just to educate the rest of our group here of the complexities of trying to get everybody on a committee to understand the seriousness, because what certain ideologies here is one side, and if anything's coming from the other side, they negate it, they marginalize it. So somehow we need to get either outside testimony that can be factualized and collaborated. And basically that's all I wanted to bring up, because we got another session 25 coming up, and I'm not sure who's coming back. But from my point of view, we need honest answers when we do ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Plosai. And I think with Adam, I think we'll have to wrap this up, unfortunately, just because we're coming to the end of our time. But I would like to thank all of the guest speakers from the bottom of our hearts for being with us and spending the time and sharing their knowledge and experience. And with that, let me ask Adam to wrap up if you have some last words.
Well, I was going to respond to Representative Plosai's question. I'll email you offline, but absolutely great idea. We put people under oath at the federal system all the time, and nobody thought that was a terrible idea. It helps. But another thing that would even be more helpful, I think, again, we live in a fishbowl up here in New Hampshire, and we think it's because it's always been done this way, that's the way it's done. Well, many other jurisdictional bodies, when they take testimony, they will have a panel of people who can interact with each other, and where the representatives can say, well, now, wait a minute, I see your hand is raised, I see your face is turning blue. Might I suggest that what you just heard was false? And thank goodness you asked. Yeah, the person next to me is just wrong. I'll prove it to you right now. You can't do that at your hearings in New Hampshire, because you show up, you get your 3 minutes, and they say thank you very much, and you move on. If you're lucky enough to go towards the end, you might be able to rebut something. But panels of experts, panels of citizens, citizens and companies, however you want to do it, that's the way to get to the truth, not to have people lined up in the back of the room to give their 3 minutes.
All right, thank you. And now we just have a word from Susan Richmond. Let me see if I can get this slide up about what's coming up.
I've got it. Here we are. Okay. Well, so thank you, first of all. That was really wonderful. And uh-oh.
Is that the wrong one? No.
Well, no, I just can't move to the next slide. Can you?
Okay.
Can you do
No,
that,
it's these are my slides. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so next slide, please. Oh, we're turning into a comedy routine.
Which one are you, which slide are we on now?
Okay. I would like slide number 2, please.
Describe it. Campaigning?
Postcards. Okay,
Postcard.
so let me start talking, which is all the things that you've heard about. We have postcards that you can write to your citizens saying the New Hampshire environment is on the ballot. Please take it seriously and think about the environment when you vote.
I'm talking in case my video gets bigger. Here are the beautiful postcards in my video.
Thank you, Mary Beth. So if you will write to New Hampshire Network at gmail.org. That's pretty easy. New Hampshire Network at gmail.org to request postcards. I'll email you back and find out. I probably can't give you addresses, sadly, but if you can, we'll have a conversation. They are beautiful postcards where you can say, we are worried about PFAS or cyanobacteria, or will my kids get ever to skate on the pond? Because I sure enjoyed it when I was growing up. So that is what that Oh, do we see the postcard? There it
Yep.
is. Okay, so that's what the postcard looks like, and you get to put in your favorite issues for people to write about. So there you go. There's our Gmail address right there. Say you want postcards, and I'll write you back. Okay, next slide, please. We have another event coming up, October 7th. It is campaigning for the climate. So we're not here to tell you the climate's on the ballot. We want to talk about what you can still do in addition to those postcards to get truthful answers from your candidates, speak to the voters in your vicinity, methods and messaging, what we can do before we actually vote on November 5th. So join us October 7th to talk about how to get the message out, campaigning for the climate. Next slide. Then Tom Irwin is coming back to talk about an even more formidable topic, and this will be sometime in November, holding the fossil fuel actors accountable. We're beginning to read about this happening in other states, and maybe it will come to a state near us. Legal strategies that are beginning to have success in demanding that fossil fuel actors pay for some of the damage that they're causing. Next slide. And sadly, we had to cancel this presentation back in the spring due to the illness of the presenter. So we're doubly thrilled that she is well, and she will indeed come and talk to us about how discarded clothes impact public health and the environment. They have a huge effect. It's really astonishing. And that will be in December. So before you buy a bunch of Christmas finery, you need to find out from Dr. Julia Devoy about the public health impact of fast fashion. Next slide. And this is our asking you to come join us at New Hampshire Network. We send out newsletters every week, trying to tell you what other groups are doing. We will have legislative spreadsheet where you can find out what these bills are as they come up, and the recommendations we're getting from the people that are advising us. And we have energy groups, working groups that meet every other week or once a month on energy. That one is for members of energy committees in particular to share ideas and suggestions about how to operate. And just FYI, everyone, now is the time to be working on your warrant articles that you're going to want to present in March. So go to our website and look under Working Groups Energy if you want the recording of that event to learn about how to prepare for your town meeting. Plastics Group really formidably active, and they have been working on PFAS and those kinds of pollutions, plastic pollution, a climate group, and an environment group. Okay, next slide. We're almost at the end. So also come to our website, newhampshirenetwork.org, to see those recordings of past events, of past meetings, to get the Zoom link time, date, agenda for those working groups, and to see a calendar of all the events we know about in New Hampshire and suggestions of actions you can take. And that is it, except the final slide is our address. And thank you so much. Oh, no, back up one more. I forgot. Plastics Working Group has their own website. They have developed actions and templates for citizens to help their communities deal with plastic pollution. And their website and their 10 Towns, 10 Actions toolkit has been viewed in over 70 countries. So really potent. So take a look at that. And I think now I will leave you back to Reinmar. Thanks, Reinmar.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you all for being here and for helping us and guiding us as to what your priorities are and what we can do to help. That's